This video is for IGCSE History students studying the collapse of international peace. It will briefly cover the events which occurred along the way to Hitler becoming Fuhrer, and then some of the actions taken by Hitler before the outbreak of war in 1939. This video is designed to help you get a little bit more detail about the actions that Hitler took and decide if he was the one responsible for the collapse of international peace. So let's start by taking a quick look at how Hitler became the Fuhrer. In January of 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. In February, the famous Reichstag fire took place just days before the next scheduled election. Hitler managed to convince Hindenburg to pass an emergency law, which he then used to imprison the opposition party leaders. So with the fire blamed on the communists, which meant that they weren't allowed to accept any votes, the Nazi Party won 288 seats, or 44% of the vote. In March of 1933, the Enabling Act was passed, and it required 2/3 of the majority to get it through, which Hitler, of course, had because he had imprisoned a lot of his political opponents with the excuse of the Reichstag fire. Now, the new law, the Enabling Act, meant that Hitler could make laws without Reichstag approval for up to 4 years. On the 30th of June 1934, the Night of the Long Knives occurred, with the SS committing over 400 murders of potential opponents. This included Ernst Röhm, who was the leader of the SA at the time. With these people dead, Hitler no longer faced much political opposition. And by the 19th of August 1934, just after Hindenburg had died, Hitler declared himself jointly Chancellor, President, and the head of the army, which made him the Führer. Now we know that Hitler wanted to abolish the Treaty of Versailles. He made no secret of this. He outlined all his anger and his plans in his book Mein Kampf. Hitler was also opposed to communism. He believed the Bolsheviks wanted to take over Germany. A quote from Mein Kampf reads, "We must not forget the Bolsheviks are bloodstained. They overran a great state and in a fury of massacre wiped out millions of their most intelligent fellow countrymen. The menace which Russia suffered under is one which perpetually hangs over Germany. Germany is the next great objective of Bolshevism. All of our strength is needed to raise up our nation once more and rescue it from the embrace of the international python." Hitler used his opposition to communism to defend some of his future actions which led to World War II. It's also one of the reasons why Britain allowed Hitler to break one of the clauses of the Treaty of Versailles, because they too were afraid of communism taking over the world. The following is a brief list of actions that Hitler took before the outbreak of war in 1939. These are some of the actions that led to the collapse of international peace. Back in 1933, Hitler had removed Germany from the League of Nations. This was 7 years after it had been let in. This showed the world that Hitler was not worried about cooperating with the other leaders, and he wasn't too interested in what the League of Nations had to say. In 1934, he boldly attempted to take over Austria, but Mussolini intervened by placing his troops on the border between Austria and Germany. This was one of the times where one of the other powerful leaders actually stopped Hitler from trying to do what he was doing. In 1935, Hitler openly held a freedom to rearm military rally, and he reintroduced conscription, brazenly defying the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The major powers condemned Hitler's actions through statements, but they were unwilling to take any further action. Neither France nor Britain had the military means or the money or the willingness to go against him. In 1936, Hitler further defied the terms of the Treaty of Versailles by sending troops into the Rhineland. Again, he came up against no opposition. In the same year, he made an anti-communist pact with Japan, which was apparently to safeguard each country from attack by the Soviet Union. Remember, that was against the League of Nations as well. League of Nations were trying to stop countries from having these pacts to protect each other. In 1937, Hitler made another anti-communist pact, this time with Italy. Italy had just left the League of Nations after facing economic sanctions due to the invasion of Abyssinia. Another bold move in 1937 was Hitler's involvement in the Spanish War. This was a civil war. He sent aircraft and military, as well as helping to transport Franco's troops from North Africa back to Spain. By 1938, Hitler had taken over Austria and the Sudetenland, and in March of 1939, he invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. On the 1st of September, Hitler invaded Poland, which was the trigger of World War II. Just 1 week before this, Germany had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which agreed to split Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union, meaning that the Soviet Union weren't going to put up a fight. This was the tipping point, and on the 3rd of September, Britain and France finally declared war on Germany. You might then ask, how did Hitler get away with all those actions? Why did nobody stop him? And had he planned out each of these actions or simply taken opportunities that he saw? Up until the 1960s, the common consensus among historians was that Hitler was a great planner. However, in the 1960s, that sort of changed with a guy named A.J.P. Taylor. He believed a bit differently. He believed that Hitler was a gambler and that he seized all the opportunities put before him. So was Hitler to blame for the collapse of international peace? Or can we blame other factors, such as the economic depression, the weakness of the Treaty of Versailles, and numerous other treaties, or even the actions of the leading powers, or more to the point, lack of actions? Let's start by examining Hitler's rearmament policy. There are a number of factors here which you need to remember. When Hitler came to power, unemployment in Germany was still very high. His first move was to draft thousands of unemployed men into the army, which achieved two things. It lowered the unemployment rate and expanded the German army, which helped to keep his promise to both challenge the Treaty of Versailles and to make Germany strong again. Remember that until this point, Germany had been involved in the disarmament talks of 1932 before walking out after they couldn't agree with the other main powers. In 1936, Hitler reintroduced conscription. He was not challenged by the League of Nations. As he guessed, a lot of other countries were using conscription to combat unemployment, and Britain had always felt that this particular term of the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh. Britain, of course, had already helped Germany rearm by signing a naval agreement which allowed Germany to increase its navy by up to 35%. In 1935, the German government was spending 7.4% of their budget on armaments, and by 1940, this had increased to 38% of their total spending. To answer the original questions, rearmament showed that Hitler was consciously building up his military, ignoring the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. His actions were tolerated or appeased because of the state of Germany's economy and those of the other main powers. He was not challenged because the major powers were not in a position to go to war themselves. The remilitarization of the Rhineland was another massive risk that Hitler took. Again, he was breaking the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and again, he was not stopped. He got away with this move for a couple of reasons. One being that France had just signed a pact with the USSR, which Hitler claimed was a threat to Germany. He was also confident that Britain would not intervene, as the British also agreed that as the Rhineland was a part of Germany, they had a right to station troops there. The biggest threat now was the French. Would they let this happen? As it turned out, the French leaders could not agree on a course of action. No individual wanted to be responsible for starting a war, so Hitler was condemned by the League of Nations, but aside from that, he got away with it. The next major move that Hitler made was Anschluss with Austria in 1938. Anschluss was the joining of Austria and Germany. Now remember that Hitler had tried to do this in 1934, but was stopped by Mussolini. But now, Hitler and Mussolini were allies. Hitler was clever and thought this move through. He encouraged members of the Nazi Party who lived in Austria to stir up trouble for the government. The Austrian Chancellor tried to appeal to Britain and France, but he received no support. He decided to hold a plebiscite to see what the Austrian people actually wanted. Hitler seized this opportunity to send in troops under the pretense that they would make sure there was no trouble during the vote. As it turns out, 99.75% voted for Anschluss. It might have helped that there were Nazi troops stationed throughout the city to encourage the citizens to vote in the right way. Again, this bold move went unchallenged. Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, thought that it was the right of Germany to unite through legal means with Austria. France were not willing to start a war over this particular part of the treaty, also thinking that it was a flawed term to begin with. So Germany gained a new territory, rich deposits of gold and iron, and a large army. It was becoming clear that France and Britain would not go to war to defend a treaty that was clearly flawed. Your job now is to evaluate. Did Hitler's actions lead to the collapse of international peace, or were there other factors to blame? Factors such as the economic climate of the time, the weakness of the Treaty of Versailles and other such treaties, or was it the inability of the League of Nations and the major powers to control Hitler? Every time he made a decision to break one of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, the major powers made a decision to let him. This is otherwise known as the policy of appeasement, which we'll go over in another video. Hopefully you've learned something from this, and this has helped explain a little bit more about Hitler and his actions and the collapse of international peace.